All right, welcome everyone to our fourth session of our second five-part series of building a resilient food culture. And happy Hunger Action Month to everyone. So today we will be talking about the federal government's priorities within our nation's food space. It has been a busy year in DC with a new administration in Congress, the passage of much needed COVID relief, and the continuing debate around addressing our country's infrastructure needs. How has the food system been present and what has been done and what is yet to come in 2021 and beyond? My name is Adam Morgan. I am the Advocacy Coordinator for Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank. This webinar today is being recorded and will be sent out to all registrants in the coming days. If you'd like to watch any of our previous sessions, you can find them on Food 21's website under resources. I will show that link on the last slide as we're closing out today. Feel free to submit questions and comments throughout the session as the panelists are speaking. We will reserve the last 15 minutes or so to address those questions and comments. So allow me to introduce our speakers today and then we'll get started. First, we have Carrie Calvert, Vice President of Agriculture and Nutrition Government Relations for Feeding America. Carrie has worked on nutrition, food waste, and agricultural policy for over 20 years. Before her work at Feeding America, Carrie worked for Aiken, Gump, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld in their public law and policy section on food, tax, and transportation issues. Next, we have Cheryl Cook, Deputy Secretary for Market Development of Pennsylvania's Department of Agriculture. Cheryl oversees the bureaus of Farm Show, Farmland Preservation, Food Distribution, and Market Development. She is a lawyer by training and has formerly served in the U.S. Department of Agriculture as the Pennsylvania State Director for Rural Development, Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development, and then as USDA's Chief Information Officer. Finally, we have Joycelyn Pickens, Legislative Assistant for Pennsylvania's Senior Senator Bob Casey. Joycelyn has been a member of Senator Casey's legislative staff since 2017. She has formerly interned for Philadelphia's District Attorney, Philadelphia's Mayor, and the Obama White House. She has also worked for our anti-hunger colleagues, the Greater Philadelphia Coalition Against Hunger. Thank you all so much for being here today, and we'll start by turning it over to Carrie, and by me stopping my share. There we go. Take it away, Carrie.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Adam, for that warm introduction. It's always a pleasure to be able to speak to our network members and to speak to their community and supporters as well. I work for Feeding America's national office in their Washington, D.C. office. So my lens on the issue of food insecurity and hunger is really through that of our food banks. And we know that is where the heart and soul of our work is. It's really grounded in local communities and what's happening with our food banks, their partner organizations, and state and local government. That's where solutions need to happen and come together. So I'm really excited to be able to talk a little bit about the federal perspective in terms of what the last 18 months have meant, what we've seen happening in the charitable food space, how that has collided at times, collaborated at others with what's happening with food systems and the food supply chain, and then maybe some ideas about where we go from here. I was actually at Feeding America during the 2009-2010 recession, and the economic impact of the pandemic was really like nothing I've experienced before in terms of the sudden significant impact on significant parts of our economic system, people in travel, service sector jobs, were, significantly impacted by the stay-at-home orders. You had school systems going virtual, making it harder for parents without childcare to work, even if they were still able to work in their jobs. So unlike other recessions that can have a slower build, the economic impact was very swift, and right away, our food banks were seeing a doubling of demand, at least, if not more. And food banks and state and local governments stepped in to try to make sense of what was going on. And honestly, really, it was up to state and local government and food banks and other community organizations to really step in those early days. Oftentimes, if you lose your job and you need food urgently, the fastest thing to do is to find where your local food bank or food pantry is having an emergency food distribution. That's a lot quicker than signing up for unemployment insurance or SNAP. I mean, some state unemployment insurance systems were so hard to navigate that millions of people gave up, even if they were eligible for unemployment during the pandemic. That wasn't a resource that they could utilize. SNAP participation did grow, thankfully, because that is a very, very effective way to meet need in a pandemic. But really, for those first couple months, we saw probably the largest demand we have ever seen on our food bank network. So throughout the first 12 months of the pandemic, increase in demand was averaging about 55% above normal demand. And even now, 18 months into the pandemic, it is still about 40% higher than usual. And that is with a significant federal investment that has happened. The first year of the pandemic, we saw bipartisan investment in broader support such as stimulus checks and unemployment insurance, as well as expansion, establishment and use of SNAP emergency allotments to increase the amount of SNAP benefits to the maximum allowed allotment for SNAP participants, flexibility in terms of child nutrition and SNAP programs that were, helped to get more people into the program, launching of a pandemic EBT program to help feed kids who weren't physically in school receiving a school lunch, and about $1.2 billion in emergency food for food banks. Government nutrition programs use a lot of acronyms. So here's another one for you. It's called the Emergency Food Assistance Program, or TFAP. It provided about 39% of the food distributed by food banks last year. So it's a big part of how food banks receive food from U.S. growers and producers and distribute it to people in need. Congress provided funds for that program in 2020, and that really helped our pandemic response. One of the other things that we saw that was really helpful, and Pennsylvania, did a great job of this. And so I won't say too many details because I have a feeling our next speaker will focus on this, but Pennsylvania used a lot of their state and local funding provided through the CARES Act to help support growers and producers that didn't have a buyer for their food product, and to buy that and provide that food to food banks. Oftentimes like processing might be needed, or the food might need to be harvested or packed. When 50% of consumers stopped eating out and began eating all their food at home, it really upended our food supply system. Food banks definitely were hit by that. Obviously, a lot of local growers and producers in our agriculture community were hit hard by that. And so some of those examples where federal resources were utilized to support local growers and producers in the community and to get that food to people that really need it due to the pandemic, that is a win-win in our book. And if we could have every state do what Pennsylvania did in that situation, then I think we'd be the stronger for it. So, where we sit right now, just checking the time, I think I'm doing all right on it. But, where we sit right now, 18 months in, is the bipartisan COVID recovery investments that Congress passed in 2020, combined with the American Rescue Plan Act passed by Congress in March 2021 have really provided unprecedented levels of funding for the federal safety net system. And that has really played a significant role in ensuring that food insecurity did not drastically climb over the last year. It really has done quite a bit to keep things level. One of the resources we released this week, and I am going to go ahead and share with everyone on here, is we took a look at data that was collected on how many people in December 2020, said within the last 6 months or so, if they'd utilized the charitable food system. So 60 million people last year utilized food banks within the Feeding America Network and food banks outside of the Feeding America Network. So the charitable food system really played a significant role in augmenting the much larger federal response to the pandemic. Something that is really amazing to think about in terms of how much food was distributed last year and the significant lift that communities nationwide have done to accomplish that. Moving forward, based on what we're seeing, it's clear that expansions in the federal safety net are just not going to be enough on their own without further support for the charitable food system. So part of that support might look like, Pennsylvania has a program called PASS, the Pennsylvania Ag Surplus System Program. Cheryl will correct me if I got that acronym a little off. But PASS is a great model of how you can provide state funds to food banks and other nonprofits to purchase food that doesn't have a retail outlet and connect it with people in the community. In fact, PASS was used as a model with Pennsylvania's senior senator on marker or model legislation on farm to food bank programs for the 2018 Farm Bill. And we were thrilled that that program was included in the legislation. It provides yet another resource to communities. Scaling programs like that, those are things that really help support the food bank system. We're really excited to work with Senator Casey and other members of Congress in the Senate and the House and the administration to support the nutrition provisions and other provisions like the child tax credit that are in proposed legislation right now. We're also urging members of Congress to support adding additional funding for food banks and emergency food assistance through TFAP in either this big reconciliation legislation or year-end spending legislation, because we know that the demand on our food banks and our food pantries frankly has not declined as quickly as we thought it would, particularly given the amount of investment and resources that have been provided by federal legislation. Clearly, need in communities goes much deeper than the data would always lead us to believe, particularly with some of the unemployment insurance provided in earlier COVID recovery legislation ending this month. We're bracing for additional need in communities, and we want to make sure that we have the resources to provide that. So, hopefully we can continue to work on a bipartisan basis to show, what has been working to help people in communities and give sort of a blueprint for continuing that aid. I know members of Congress and USDA are also monitoring really closely the recovery from Hurricane Ida. In the Northeast, that looks like flooding and a lot of property damage, and that could really be harmful for people with limited incomes, particularly. But in New Orleans right now, where they still don't have power and food supplies are running short, we know that communities will face a lengthy recovery. So making sure we have, that we're doing all we can to uplift resources for that recovery as well as the continued pandemic recovery is a priority I hope we can all get behind. With that, I think that's it, Adam. Looking forward to hearing from Cheryl and Joycelyn and the discussion later. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And pass the Pennsylvania Agricultural Surplus System. So very good. And then I think that's a really good point you made about the difficulties so many saw in assessing like the unemployment benefits and some of the other benefits that were coming down the pike, especially in the context of just the slew of assistance that was provided in a lot of those bipartisan measures you mentioned, and that yes, there was a lot available, but it didn't mean it was easy to access, and that maybe not everyone was able to access it or still trying. So, all right, thanks so much, Carrie, and then we'll turn it over to Cheryl.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Carrie, for the commercial for the PASS program. Appreciate that. As Adam said, I've been kind of splitting my life between the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. And, I think if nothing else, the conclusion you might draw is that food and I go back a long way. I really like making sure that people get enough to eat and that people who want to produce food have an opportunity to earn a living at it. I think it's important to recognize that when we see folks who maybe are food insecure, that there may be more going on in their lives than just that. And one of the things that used to make me crazy when I was at USDA working in their single family home mortgage program is we would qualify somebody for that program based on their income. And if they were below 60% or in some cases 40% of median income in their county, your common sense just told you they or their children were eligible for some other form of nutrition assistance from USDA, but there was no way to hook those people together and to have them be able to apply for all of the programs that may be of benefit to them. And I've been thinking about that a lot in the last few months since Congress enacted funding for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And knowing that so few of those dollars are actually getting out. So anything that any of you might help us do to raise awareness on emergency rental assistance and clean water and all of the other issues that go into the whole person being healthy and being able to thrive, I look forward to working together on those things. USDA and the farm bill that drives USDA is a complex beast. The Department of Agriculture is 17 distinct agencies, and I'm assuming most of the 60-some of you who are on this call today are familiar with the Food and Nutrition Service and most of its programs. But USDA is at its best when all of the agencies are rowing in the same direction towards some of the same goals. And I just want to touch on a few of those programs and some of their inspirations, as well as some of what we've been able to do here at the state level, both because of federal programs or in some cases to help inspire federal programs, and PASS is probably the best example of that. It was because of our success here in Pennsylvania with the PASS program that the 2018 Farm Bill included the Farm to Food Bank program, and many thanks to Senator Casey for helping to make that happen. But good ideas get stolen between the federal level and the state level all the time. One of the other things we got with CARES Act funding besides the extra PASS money was a program we called the Fresh Food Financing Initiative. This was its second iteration. The first iteration of the Fresh Food Financing Initiative about 10 years ago spawned something at the federal level called the Healthy Food Financing Initiative that has been part of the last several federal farm bills that gives the USDA rural development agencies the opportunity to work in urban locations if it is for the purpose of getting people food. So there are examples, both directions of how these projects can flow across agencies. USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture is sort of an umbrella over the land grant university systems here in Pennsylvania, Penn State University. Some of you might have noticed in July that they announced their latest round for the Nutrition Incentive and Produce Prescription Grants. NIFA also operates something called the Community Food Projects Grants, which are competitive grants, but awarded at the local level to help people build up their food systems and take advantage of opportunities to bring farmers and consumers together. Both of those programs, I suspect, they're ongoing, regularly funded programs, but I suspect as Congress continues to respond to economic indicators lagging out of the pandemic, that they will see additional funds or at least stable funding for both of those programs into the future. USDA's Economic Research Service provides something called the Community Food Security Analysis Toolkit right on their website, where community leaders can come together and analyze what their opportunities are as far as bringing any local agriculture or food production in concert with their consumers' needs and food security concerns. ERS also offers a food access research atlas. It's an interactive mapping tool that lets you see where food deserts are as defined by USDA. And of course, they had to use a definition that would work nationwide. So it may not be as precise as you can be locally, but it's a really good starting point, and that's also available on their website. Just earlier this week, USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service announced a new grant program for farm workers and food workers to help them recover from the impacts of the pandemic. And of course, we saw in our meatpacking plants very early on some of the most severe impacts from COVID, and began to realize just how easily spread it was. The same is true for farm workers who are out in the fields picking crops, that often being transported from wherever their housing may be to the field in a van provided by their employer. And that's one thing in normal times, but during a pandemic provided for some extra anxiety because you cannot socially distance in a 15-passenger van. Anyway, we will be looking hard at applying for those grants through the Ag Marketing Service, and some of you who are active with our Emergency Food Assistance Advisory Council, you can expect to be quizzed on whether you want to join us in seeking some of those funding for farm worker and food worker relief grants. USDA's Farm Service Agency, as the name suggests, is the part of USDA that is really dedicated to supporting farmers. But those farmers don't all have to be in rural areas. FSA can make farm ownership and operating loans, down payment loans, various types of farm support programs to help people stay in business once they get in business. They don't have the kind of only in rural area restrictions that my favorite agencies in rural development have. I say favorite because I spent 11 years in rural development and it just can't be helped. My very favorite rural development program is the Community Facilities Program. And it is primarily a loan program, but there has always been a small grant component to it that would allow somebody to make their loan more affordable. Basically, you can do a project with a little bit of grant money. It helps bring down the total cost of the project to the community that's doing it. Any community with fewer than 20,000 people is eligible, is considered rural for purposes of this program. The loans can be, depending on what you're doing with them, if you're building a whole new food bank, they can go out as long as 40 years. It's fixed rate financing that today is 2.25%. So at least until October 1st with the new fiscal year, that is the interest rate. I doubt it will change much. If anything, it may go down. Some of you may have noticed that a week or two ago, Rural Development announced a new pot from the American Rescue Plan with some real grant money to it. And this is all community facilities rules. It's the community facilities program, but it's $500 million in new grants that could either be for recovery grants of $25,000 up to $1 million, or impact grants, which are the longer term, larger projects of $5 to $10 million. Again, if you're a community of fewer than 20,000 people, if you need help with your facility costs, equipment costs, or operating expenses, this is probably something you want to take a look at. Similarly, USDA Rural Development does have home ownership and home repair programs, and I especially, as winter is setting in sooner than we think, want to talk about the Section 504 program. Section 504 is a home repair program. It refers to the particular section of the Housing Act of 1949. If you have someone who is below 50% of county median income, they may be eligible for a loan of up to $20,000 at 1% interest for things like adding insulation or putting on a new roof or doing the things that it takes, maybe adding a ramp for someone who needs that extra assistance now since they've moved into the home. All of those kind of home repairs that make living and the quality of life a little better for people who you're seeing because they happen to also be food insecure. Similarly, rural development in communities of fewer than 10,000 in population can provide funding for public water and sewer. And I'm concerned about the quality of the water here in Pennsylvania. Once you get outside of our metropolitan areas, the vast majority of people are still on well water. And I know from my own well, I've been buying bottled water for 30 years. Not everybody has the luxury or the privilege that I've had to be able to do that. Rural development does also offer some programs for farmers to include value-added grants and co-op development opportunities that I think might help bring consumers and farmers together. I know Feeding Pennsylvania has a new co-op project that I think is working just great. There's more opportunity for people who have a common need and a common interest to develop those co-op opportunities. Here in Pennsylvania, USDA has funded a group called the Keystone Development Center. It's a nonprofit organization that is solely dedicated to creating new and helping emerging cooperatives to thrive. So there's a resource there. Food and Nutrition Service, of course, deals with many Pennsylvania agencies. We are the last resort here at the Department of Agriculture. The first resort against hunger is, of course, the SNAP program. I know many of us celebrated the recent change in the Thrifty Food Plan that will be effective October 1st. Our colleagues at the Department of Human Services are the primary administrators of that program, along with the Department of Education for the Child Nutrition Programs and the Department of Health for WIC. Our Bureau of Food Assistance takes on TFAP, the Senior Food Box Program, formerly known as the Commodity Supplemental Food Program here in Pennsylvania, and the State Food Purchase Program and the PASS program. I know most of you on this call are familiar with Karen Long Earl or are already part of her fan club. If you're not, we should fix that. Karen and Jane Clements from Feeding Pennsylvania, I think between them, neither took a day off for the first 3 months straight of the pandemic. Probably neither of them got more than about 4 hours of sleep a night. But when you have that kind of leadership who just refuses to fail and refuses to let people go hungry, with the kind of volunteers that we're able to work with through the Food Bank Network, things can happen that makes it all go. But we do have several Pennsylvania Farm Bill programs as well, and I'd encourage you, if you haven't visited our website, to go ahead and do that. I'll put the link in the chat. From farm to school grants, urban agriculture grants, ag and youth grants to bring farm and agriculture into the schools, even farm vitality grants to help farmers with business plans that may include planting additional product for donation to the PASS program. All of those things are available through our website. If you go there and just hit the search line, you can find it. As one final act here, Adam, I'll go ahead and put my contact information in the chat line too. And thank you so much for the chance to join you today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cheryl. And thank you for that shout out to Jane at Feeding Pennsylvania. And I just wanted to mention that the cooperative that you mentioned, MARC, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Cooperative, And they're doing really good work in the moving of food from New England to Pennsylvania all the way down to Virginia. So, okay, thanks, Cheryl. And lastly, we will turn to Joycelyn from Senator Casey's office.
Well, first off, it's an honor to be here with Cheryl and Carrie. As was touched on in the chat, definitely incredible advocates, incredible folks who really are truly great stewards in the food access space, and we are very lucky to have them fighting for Pennsylvanians. At the federal level, I wanted to just walk through what has been done and why there is such an urgent need to do more. And I had a presentation to just walk through some of the numbers. Carrie touched on a lot of this, but truly what we have seen through COVID, the pandemic as a whole, is what I like to call, and what has been said before, is the pandemic has been the great aggravator, the great exposer of many of the inequities throughout our system, the social inequities, economic inequities, and it truly has shown why we have safety nets and how a lot of the food safety net systems that we've had have been ineffective. And so before the pandemic even really became in full effect, the food insecurity rate in America was the lowest it had been in nearly 20 years. And still, we had 11 million children who were food insecure. We had 35 million overall in our country who struggled to access food reliably. And that is truly not enough. And so when you even insert any sort of aggregating factor into that, such as a pandemic, that it wipes out jobs, that increases poverty, that food insecurity rate is just going to skyrocket. So immediately Congress sprung into action, and we passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act in early March of 2020. That bill provided more than $1 billion in funding, $1 billion in funding for nutrition programs, including WIC, SNAP, and also TFAP, the Emergency Feeding Food Assistance Program. We also established the Pandemic Electronic Benefit Transfer Card to allow access for food for children who are outside of school. It's a little tricky, but we also allotted emergency benefits for folks through SNAP, and we expanded the eligibility for schools and nonprofits to allow meals, to provide meals outside of the kind of burdensome meal pattern requirements meal pattern requirements. And so that was in early to mid-March. Soon after that, March 25th, we passed the CARES Act, which Cheryl talked about as being a significant pot of money for also our farmers as well. That was another $15.8 billion to build on top of the funding for our nutrition programs for farmers, families. We also provided $9 billion for child nutrition programs, $450 million for TFAP for food banks, and another $100 million for tribal communities. At the end of the year, through our omnibus appropriations bill, we included a 15% increase in SNAP benefits. We ensured that there was an ability to use these SNAP benefits for online retail, particularly with the spread of COVID in indoor settings and how dangerous that can be for seniors and individuals with disabilities. We wanted to ensure that folks had access to online ordering and even delivery. And so that was a huge fight for Democrats in the Senate to ensure that we were able to ensure that folks were able to use their SNAP benefits for online purchases, and ensuring that the technology was there for USDA to work on expanding that pilot program throughout. I am speeding through this a little bit because I know we have a little bit of time, and I want to make sure we have more time for questions. Through that omnibus appropriations bill, we also provided $400 million for food banks, 13 million for senior nutrition, $175 million for nutrition services for seniors, extended the PEBT program, provided additional funding for schools and daycares to ensure that they are able to continue to provide meals for children in their care. And we also ensured that there was 75 million for the GusNIP program to support access to healthy food purchases. Then in March of this year, I'm sure a lot of you tracked the American Rescue Plan and the passage of that through the Senate and the House. That bill extended that 15% benefit increase for SNAP. It also extended the ability for folks to be able to purchase online, to purchase food through SNAP online, and provided additional funding for that technology to facilitate those purchases. We provided vouchers, increased the amount for WIC fresh fruits and vegetable vouchers, provided additional funding for senior nutrition, and also supported additional funding for nutrition services on the territories. Moving forward, the Build Back Better agenda that President Biden has proposed is primarily focused on child nutrition and thinking about how we can really support the youth who have been severely impacted by the COVID pandemic. We know that these formative years are critical for children, and particularly ensuring that they have adequate nutrition is vital to childhood development. And so through the Build Back Better agenda, President Biden has proposed several provisions that Senator Casey has also actually advocated for, including ensuring that any child who receives Medicaid and Social Security is automatically eligible for free school meals. He also has proposed making it easier for schools in high poverty neighborhoods to provide universal school meals at no charge to any of the students through something called community eligibility. And then also there is an expansion of something called summer EBT. So during the summer months when children are not in school and they don't have access to school meals, which can often be the one time when children have reliable breakfast and lunch, and then when school is out, they no longer have access to those meals. They can have similar to a SNAP EBT card, providing access to this summer EBT card year-round, particularly when there is a closure, such as a storm or a pandemic, ensuring that kids have access to food, no matter, ensuring there aren't these administrative delays. And then there's also two other provisions to ensure that there is a healthy food initiative. So we are maintaining healthy standards in the meals that we're providing. And lastly, President Biden has a provision to repeal the harmful ban on SNAP for individuals who are formerly incarcerated. There is a lifetime ban for folks who were convicted of drug convictions. States have the option to repeal that ban. In Pennsylvania, that is partially repealed for SNAP and TANF. We have certain drug testing requirements. States can opt in or modify their requirements, but President Biden has proposed repealing that in full. So moving forward, that is what Congress is focused on through the budget reconciliation, budget resolution process. And Senator Casey is committed to working for those policies, and hopefully, we're all pushing forward towards a September 27th deadline. But ultimately, I think that as we saw I think I saw it in the chat, the report that came out by USDA, clearly there is still a need across our nation to address food insecurity. While the number has been unchanged I think that speaks clearly to why it was so important for Congress to take the action that it did to invest in SNAP, to invest in TFAP. It speaks to the great work of food banks such as the folks in the Feeding America Network to support families in need who have lost their jobs. I think that the collective food system really supported families throughout the past year, but it simply isn't enough and it simply isn't sustainable. And so moving forward, the federal government needs to find solutions that can take a whole of government approach to building up and building out families to ensure that they're not relying on food banks as a whole, as a long-term solution. And that brought me to the last piece of the Build Back Better agenda that President Biden is proposing, and is also a policy that Senator Casey has advocated for as well, which is the Child Care Tax Credit expansion. So in the American Rescue Plan Act, there was an expansion of the Child Care Tax Credit, which expands the Child Care Tax Credit from $2,000 per child to $3,000 for every child 6 years above, and for $3,600 for a child under 6,000, or sorry, under 6. And so after the initial payments went out in July, a census report came out, and it found that significant rates of food insecurity were reduced, and that a lot of that money was used for food. And so if we are talking about how can we as a whole use our government to find ways to reduce food insecurity and not rely on our charitable food system to end hunger, but really look into relying on economic supports as well, I think that the Build Back Better agenda really takes that comprehensive approach. And truly, again, back to that USDA ERS report, Economic Research Service report, it showed how inequitable the food insecurity has been distributed throughout the demographics. Black households, Hispanic households have had nearly double the food insecurity rates over the past year. So using these types of policies that can go to all households and can benefit all households are really beneficial. So I'll end there and open up for any questions.
Thanks so much, Joycelyn. I wanted to follow up on what you were saying about the September 27th deadline. If you could speak to more about that, and then also kind of the status of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was, I know, already passed by the Senate. So you all have done your job, and it's sitting in the House. But just wondering if you've been hearing anything from your colleagues in the House, and like what the status is of that, because I know it has many provisions that would affect our farmers and food supply chain and some of our more rural infrastructure needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we believe that a deal has been struck for that to be brought to the floor in the House. My understanding is probably, or rather my foresight is as good as anyone else's as what that vote will look like. But my desire is for that to come to the floor and to have a positive vote. We know that there won't be any sort of amendments to that bill, but broadly, that bill is about physical infrastructure and how can we tackle the climate crisis? How can we invest in our communities, particularly rural communities? How can we support environmental remediation, build bridges, support transmission lines, and also I'm trying to think of, I handle environmental issues as well, and I'm trying to think of the transportation side of things and not just the environmental part of the bill. But there's obviously, of course, water infrastructure pieces as well. But there are lots of pieces of this bill that would benefit Pennsylvania, EV infrastructure. But I think that right now we are hoping to see the bill come to the floor before October in the House. The intent, I think, is what you probably heard in the news, is the bipartisan bill would pass, and then, well, the reconciliation bill would pass the Senate first, and then the bipartisan bill would pass the House, is the intention. But we will see what that looks like. I'm sure you all saw the op-ed from Senator Manchin asking for a pause. And so uncertain on what that looks like in the Senate side, but we've had a deadline that is in the reconciliation for getting all of the legislation drafted by the 15th of September. So that is just next week. We expect committees to then have a markup, and then folks are hoping to get things passed and out of the door pretty quickly, because we also have to fund the government by the end of the month.
Right. Yeah, and then another piece of that bipartisan infrastructure bill that I think is relevant is the broadband pieces, right? Our webinar last month was specifically about infrastructure, and it was a shocking number of Pennsylvania farms that still don't have broadband access. So I think that itself would go a long way in helping the Pennsylvania agricultural system and our rural communities. Carrie and Cheryl, if you want to come back. Carrie, if you had anything else to add to the outlook for both the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the budget reconciliation bill, and then also if you had anything to say about USDA's new report, especially from Feeding America's context of tracking food insecurity.
Well, first on the art of reading the tea leaves on what's happening on the Hill. I think Joycelyn really covered it all. Honestly, and the process is important to follow, but also since, our true north is advocating on behalf of the people we serve. So to a certain extent, we get to take the easy road sometimes and just speak to the issue that we want to lift up versus getting bogged down in the process. We'll be watching it all eagerly, and really we want to be a connector and a communicator there, and lift up the stories of impact that we're hearing from all of you, because that really helps inform our advocacy and what your dedicated public servants are doing at the state and federal level to either implement resources that have already been provided or to legislate and provide additional resources. On the USDA numbers, our take is we say all the time, can't end hunger by food banking, right? We know that. We are an important resource, but definitely not the largest nor the most important. Prior to the pandemic, for every 1 year provided by a Feeding America Network member, SNAP provided 9, right? And if you ever wondered about the importance and the impact of the National School Lunch Program, the last 18 months have shown how critically important that is to the lives of children that are participating in that program, right? So we're but one small part, an important emergency part. And I think our role in providing food assistance is, how can we provide a resource today? And also, how can we make sure the people that are coming to us are connected with other resources that they're eligible for and that they are in need of, right? So it's, through that lens on serving our community, how can we be that conduit to other resources that we know have a much broader, larger, and systemic impact? So honestly, I am not a researcher. At first, when I saw it, I was like, how can this be that food insecurity did not go up? Demand has been so high. We served 60 million people last year. But then digging into the data, I think it's really a reflection of the excellent work that Congress has done in providing as much investment for the safety net system over the last 18 months. But I think it's an important reminder that we still need to continue these investments. This recovery is not over. And if you look at the very specific data, for some communities, food insecurity has not improved and it's gotten worse, particularly food insecure children and communities of color. They're, the specific, if you go below the high level details, it shows we still have a lot of work to do.
And I'm going to share in the chat box Feeding America's own research and reports on food insecurity numbers. It's called Map the Meal Gap. I've shared it in previous webinars, but want to make sure everyone has that. It's a really good resource when you're talking about numbers and research.
Yeah, my favorite chart on that is in the executive summary, and it shows federal nutrition programs and who's eligible for them, and how many food insecure people are income eligible. So likely eligible due to how much money they report making for federal nutrition programs. 30% of people that identify as food insecure are above 185% of the federal poverty level. So likely not eligible unless they had a heck of a lot of, medical deductions for nutrition programs. So, that's that gap that oftentimes we fill. Either, SNAP benefits don't last long enough, or I'm food insecure, but I am not eligible for this resource. And I think it speaks to the need to both expand the amount of resources we're providing and to expand access and eligibility, right? We're just missing a lot of people.
Cheryl, there was a question came in about the state of the food supply chain. And I saw you had responded with a message, but I just wanted to ask that again further, that USDA has been making a lot of investments in addressing the supply chain and processing, increasing competition into the market. How has that flowed through PDA, or how do you see it flowing through PDA in the future?
Well, PDA gets a fairly hefty percentage of its annual budget from the federal government already. Much of that is from USDA, but particularly in the food space, the Food and Drug Administration partners with us to perform food safety inspections on their behalf. So we have that FDA relationship. We also have an EPA relationship when it comes to our regulation of pesticides and other plant material. I think what we'll see in the supply chain space is that USDA will do what it can in the space that it operates in, which is primarily meat and poultry. We've already seen that the USDA is taking comments. They're looking for opportunities to help those very small meat processors get up to snuff with their HACCP food safety planning, and being able to grow and take on more local processing. We used to have hundreds more meat processors in Pennsylvania than we do now. We also, up until about 1972, had our own state meat inspection program, and about half the states do still have their own meat inspection program. Our budget apparently was in the ditch to the point where we scrapped ours in 1972, knowing that the federal law would kick in and USDA would have to take over on those meat inspections. But it's an area that we're looking at again, and hope that USDA may come through with some financial assistance to help us stand that back up. We think there are oodles and oodles of market opportunities for fresh local meat that we're just not able to take advantage of throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, because we don't have our own meat inspection program. So that's one area in particular that I think USDA is focused on.
And just as a sort of preamble to our last webinar next month, where we're going to be focusing on racial injustice in the food system, I know that was a big part of the American Rescue Plan in USDA directives, is to help those socially disadvantaged farmers. So it just made me think, when you were talking about the grants coming through USDA and PDA earlier, that there'd be a certain subset of those specifically for socially disadvantaged farmers.
Yeah, we were able to do that really for the first time, again, with CARES Act funding. In that fresh food financing piece that I mentioned, we were able to set aside half that money for BIPOC populations, and being able to target to underserved people in places, and that worked out quite well. So I'm hopeful that as our programs go forward, we'll be able to keep doing that.
Great. And this last question, we'll start with Joycelyn, but really any of you can chime in. It was asking about making changes to the WIC program. And I think that could either be done through possibly the budget reconciliation bill coming up this fall, or even in the broader child nutrition reauthorization that would hopefully be coming thereafter. But is there any conversations about making it more user-friendly and just helping mothers be able to access and use those benefits?
Yes, I would definitely say there are lots of conversations about making WIC more user-friendly. There are concerns about the declining rates of participation, particularly in Pennsylvania. We've seen for several years the rates decline. And so the Ag Committee has committed to marking up child nutrition reauthorization legislation, which includes WIC this fall. Not sure how likely that is, but hopefully it will be in early winter. If that's not the case, early spring. But Senator Casey has WIC as one of his priorities, and we've worked closely with the National WIC Association on how can we improve retention and also user experience as well, because we know overall WIC is an effective program both for mothers and for infants. And so absolutely ensuring that even just improving the technology of the program is critical. But I'll turn it over if anyone else has anything to add.
I would just add that I agree. We need to reauthorize the child nutrition programs. It hasn't been done since 2010. There's really important policy changes that need to be made, streamlining and making WIC more user friendly. Right now there's a big drop off, particularly for older children that are eligible for WIC, because SNAP is seen as a more user friendly program. But there's real advantages to the WIC program as well. So trying to make that program more user friendly and make it easier for parents to participate and have that resource for their children is important. Another change that would help us reach children in the summertime is allowing non-congregate options for the summer food service program. That has a big impact on food banks who are trying to provide access to meals for children in need during out of school times. So being able to have that policy change be made, you need to reauthorize the underlying statute to do that. And so, we look forward to working with Joycelyn and Senator Casey's office and, everyone else that plays a key role in moving that legislation forward on the Hill.
And I think the pandemic has even more highlighted the need to modernize that WIC technology. When we saw county assistants and WIC offices closing around the state and country, and the WIC card is only able to put the benefits on by physically going to the office, while the SNAP EBT card can be put on over the internet. So I think those are definitely very important updates that hopefully can be addressed in the child nutrition reauthorization. So it's 1 o'clock now. I'm gonna have to end it there. Thank you so much, all three of you, for being here and sharing your perspectives. We really appreciate it. Let me share my screen real quick to show that there's a link there, Food 21's website, where you can find all our previous sessions. Our last session will be next month, racial justice in the food system. More information to come with that. And thank you all for attending today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.